Stand in front of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in Weston, West Virginia. It's the second largest hand-cut stone building in the world. The first is the Kremlin. Look up at it. 4 stories, a quarter-mile long, built between 1858 and 1881. Now look at the town it sits in. Weston had about 800 people when construction started. 800. The building was designed to hold 250 patients. By the 1950s, it held 2,400. That's 3 times the population of the town that built it. Let me back up, because the numbers in this story are the strangest part. In 1840, the United States Census counted about 2,500 people in what they called insane asylums. That's the whole country, 2,500. By 1880, that number was 91,000. By 1903, it crossed 150,000. By 1955, it peaked at 558,000 people living inside state mental hospitals at one time in one country. Think about that growth curve. The U.S. population roughly tripled between 1840 and 1955. The asylum population grew by more than 200,000%. The standard explanation has real merit. It says a few things. America was urbanizing. Families couldn't care for sick relatives the way they used to on farms. Cities were crowded. Doctors were starting to recognize mental illness as something that needed treatment. And a man named Thomas Story Kirkbride had a plan. Kirkbride was a Philadelphia doctor. In 1854, he published a book called On the Construction, Organization, and General Arrangements of Hospitals for the Insane. It became the blueprint, literally. State after state built asylums following his exact design. Long central building, wings stepping back at angles, lots of light, lots of air, farms attached, self-sufficient. There was also Dorothea Dix, a schoolteacher from Maine. In the 1840s, she traveled the country documenting how mentally ill people were being kept. In jails, in poorhouses, in cages, chained to walls. She wrote reports for state legislatures. She was relentless. Historians credit her with pushing 32 states to build public asylums. Some of them, she chose the land herself. The Kirkbride plan was supposed to be humane, and in some ways it was. But here's where the standard explanation covers most of it, not all of it. Look at the buildings themselves, not the idea. The actual stone and brick. It was designed to hold 500 patients. By the 1940s, it held over 2,300. The main building alone covered about 700,000 square feet. That's about the size of 14 football fields stacked under one roof. Buffalo State Asylum in New York, designed by H.H. Richardson, opened 880, 2 enormous towers of red Medina sandstone. The building stretches over 2,000 feet end to end. That's longer than 6 football fields. Athens Lunatic Asylum in Ohio, opened 1874. The town of Athens had about 3,000 people. The asylum eventually held nearly 2,000 patients on its own grounds. It had its own dairy, its own greenhouse, its own ice house, its own carriage house, a small village hidden behind the main building. Willard, Asylum in New York, opened 1869 on the shore of Seneca Lake. Within 30 years, it held over 2,000 patients. The complex had its own farm, its own power plant, its own cemetery, and its own steamboat dock. Patients arrived by water. Every state built one, sometimes 2, sometimes 5. By 1900, there were about 300 public mental hospitals in the United States, most of them built in a window of 40 years. Now, look at who paid for them. These weren't cheap. Trans-Allegheny cost the equivalent of tens of millions of dollars in today's money for a town of 800 in a state that was still recovering from being split off from Virginia during the Civil War. The construction at Trans-Allegheny was paused during the war. Union and Confederate forces both used the half-built structure. There's a story that Union troops took the gold from the local bank and shipped it north using the asylum's funds. The building survived all of it. The records of who paid the masons, where the stone came from, and how the budget more than doubled are scattered across 3 different archives in West Virginia. Some of them burned in a courthouse fire in the early 20th century. Where did the money come from? Where did the patients come from? Who filled them? The records exist for parts of this. They don't exist for all of it. Here's something I keep coming back to. The 1880 census wasn't just a population count. It was something called the census of defective, dependent, and delinquent classes. The federal government sent enumerators door to door asking about insanity. Specifically, they counted 91,097 insane persons that year. Of those, about 40,000 were in institutions. The other 50,000 were living at home. 20 years later, that ratio had flipped. By 1903, almost everyone counted as mentally ill was inside an asylum, not at home, not with family. What changed in 20 years that moved 50,000 people from their kitchens into stone buildings? The standard answer is policy. State after state passed laws making it easier to commit relatives, easier for doctors, easier for sheriffs, easier for husbands to commit wives. The legal threshold dropped to almost nothing in some states, a signature from one doctor, sometimes none. That's true. That happened. Gerald Grobb, the historian who wrote The Mad Among Us, documented all of this carefully. The laws changed, the intake forms got shorter, commitment became almost casual. In some states, you could be committed for what they called moral insanity, or religious excitement, or novel reading, or grief. The Trans-Allegheny intake records list reasons like kicked in the head by a horse, domestic trouble, menstrual derangement, and imaginary female trouble, real entries from a real ledger. You can read them today. But here's what bothers me. The buildings came first. Trans-Allegheny was being designed before the laws made commitment easy. Danvers was breaking ground before the patient surge. Buffalo State was being planned when there weren't enough patients in the entire state to fill it. Who builds a hospital for 2,000 people before 2,000 people need it? And that's the question I can't shake. Why did America build hospitals big enough for hundreds of thousands of mentally ill people in towns of just a few hundred before the patients existed to fill them? And why did those patients then appear almost on schedule to fill every bed? Let me show you what I mean. Not in one place, not in two, in town after town across the country. Start with Weston, West Virginia, the town that built Trans-Allegheny. In 1858, when the foundation was laid, Weston had roughly 800 residents. The building site was bigger than the town itself. The construction took 23 years. By the time it opened in 1881, the building could hold more patients than the county had people. The standard explanation says it served the whole region, and that's reasonable. It accounts for the size, but it doesn't account for why this remote mountain town, with no railroad at first, with no industry, was chosen. Moved north to Danvers, Massachusetts, 878. The Kirkbride building sits on a hill. Locals called it the Castle on the Hill. It was so big that the wings disappeared into the distance when you stood at one end, designed for around 500 souls. Within a generation, it held nearly 5 times that. The town of Danvers had about 6,000 people in 1880. The hospital, at its peak, held more patients than there were residents in the town. And here's a strange detail. The site Danvers was built on was Salem Village, the exact place where the witch trials began in 692. 200 years later, they built a hospital for the insane on the same ground. Now go to Athens, Ohio. The Athens Lunatic Asylum opens on a ridge above the Hocking River. The town of Athens that year had about 3,000 people. The asylum's own staff and patient population eventually exceeded that. There's a small cemetery on the grounds. Almost 2,000 graves, most marked only with numbers. Numbers, not names. Try Willard, New York, 1869. Built on a peninsula in Seneca Lake, so remote that patients arrived by steamboat. Within 30 years, it held over 2,000. In 1995, when the building was finally being closed, workers went into the attic. They found 400 suitcases belonging to patients who had arrived decades earlier and never left. The suitcases were full: photographs, letters, clothes, tools, wedding rings. Lives packed up and brought to the asylum. And then each suitcase, Opened, photographed, cataloged. The faces in the photographs look like anyone. Farmers, mothers, young men in suits. They don't look insane. They look like people who got on a boat and never came back. One more, Stockton, California. The Stockton State Insane Asylum opened in 1853. California had been a state for 3 years. The non-native population of the entire state was tiny, yet they built one of the largest asylums on the West Coast. Within a decade, it was overcrowded. Add Buffalo. The Buffalo State Asylum was being designed in the 1870s before the population surge that supposedly justified it. H.H. Richardson, one of the most famous American architects of the century, drew the plans. Frederick Law Olmsted, the man who designed Central Park, laid out the grounds. The state legislature approved it. Twin towers, taller than almost anything in the city. The whole thing covered nearly 100 acres. Add Worcester, Massachusetts, the first state-run asylum in the country. It opened in 1833 with 164 patients. By 1900, it held over 1,200. A new, larger Worcester State Hospital was built in 1877 on a different site, even bigger, with its own farm, its own train spur, its own water supply. Add Greystone Park in New Jersey. Opened in 1876, the main building had over 650,000 square feet of floor space under one roof. For decades, it was rumored to be the largest single building in America. Woody Guthrie spent his last years there. Add Northern Michigan Asylum in Traverse City, opened in 1885. The town had about 5,000 people. The asylum building stretched longer than a quarter mile. Steam tunnels ran underneath, connecting every wing. The tunnels are still there. You can walk through them on a tour. They feel like they were built for something more than steam pipes. Add Fergus Falls State Hospital in Minnesota, Norwich State Hospital in Connecticut, Kankakee State Hospital in Illinois, each one massive, each one in a small town, each one built between 1865 and 1895, almost all following the Kirkbride plan, almost all filled within a generation. Almost all of them today either demolished or empty, with their records in boxes nobody has opened. I counted using the National Register of Historic Places. At least 70 Kirkbride-style asylums were built in the United States in the second half of the 1800s. 70. In 40 years. The labor alone, the stone cutting alone, would have employed tens of thousands of skilled masons. Where did they all come from? Where did they all go after? The standard explanation has real merit here too. America was changing. Industrial work broke families apart. Immigrants without local support sometimes ended up in asylums by default. Alcoholism, syphilis, untreated epilepsy, postpartum depression. All of these got people committed. All of these increased as the population grew. That's true. That accounts for a lot. But it doesn't account for the buildings being there first. Waiting. You see it once, you call it a quirk. You see it twice, a coincidence. By the 6th or 7th time, you start to feel something else. Here's the gap I keep coming back to. The buildings exist. Many of them still stand. You can walk into Trans-Allegheny right now. They give tours. You can pay $12 and stand in the wards. The stone is real. The iron beds are real. The hand-painted ceilings are real. The records for who built these places, paid for them, and filled them are scattered, patchy, sometimes missing entire decades. State archives often have admission ledgers. But the construction records, the funding sources, the original architectural plans for some of these buildings are incomplete. The Trans-Allegheny construction records were partly lost in a courthouse fire in the early 20th century. Danvers's original cost ledgers are split between 3 different archives in Massachusetts. Some of Athens's early patient files were destroyed by water damage in the 1980s. Greystone Park's records were partially scattered when the building was demolished in 2015. People showed up with trash bags full of patient files that had been left in the basement. In 1948, a journalist named Albert Deutsch published a book called The Shame of the States. He traveled the country with a photographer, visited dozens of asylums. He wrote that conditions in some of them were worse than the Nazi camps American soldiers had just liberated. Patients sleeping on floors, naked, hosed down with cold water. The book caused a scandal. But notice what he was describing. Buildings so overcrowded that beautiful Kirkbride hospitals built for 500 were holding 3,000. The system had collapsed under its own weight. The Willard suitcases I mentioned earlier. They sit in the New York State Museum in Albany. There's a curator named Craig Williams who worked on cataloging them. The collection is publicly accessible. Researchers can request to see specific cases. Most of those suitcases have never been written about. The connection hasn't really been studied as a single question. Who were these people? Where did they come from? Why did an asylum on a remote lake have room for them? Anyone can request access. Almost no one has. Now I'm going to step out of what I can prove. Everything I've told you so far is in books, archives, museums. You can verify it. What comes next is me thinking out loud. Mark it that way in your head. What if the building boom came first because someone expected the patients? Speculation 1. The asylums were built in anticipation. They expected a population that didn't exist yet. City planners knew industrialization would create casualties. They were preparing for a wave of people broken by factories, alcohol, and dislocation. What supports this? The timing. The buildings really do predate the patient surge. What would disprove it? Finding clear documentation that asylums in the 1860s and 1870s ran half-empty for years before filling. That data exists in some state reports. It hasn't been compiled across states. Speculation 2. The buildings were repurposed. Some alternative history researchers argue these massive stone structures predate their stated construction dates, that they were built earlier by someone else for some other purpose and converted into asylums. What supports this? The sheer scale and craftsmanship is hard to square with frontier towns of a few hundred people. What would disprove it? Continuous construction records from quarry to site. Some buildings have those. Trans-Allegheny actually has reasonably good stone-cutting records, so this speculation is weaker than it looks. But for others, like Athens, the records are thinner. Speculation. The commitment laws weren't loosened by accident. They were loosened because there were beds to fill, and empty beds cost money. Once the buildings existed, the system needed bodies inside them. What supports this? The timing of the laws. They get easier as the buildings open. The financial pressure on state legislatures to justify the construction cost. What would disprove it? Letters or memos showing legislators were responding to genuine demand from doctors and families, not pressure from hospital administrators. Some of those letters exist. They haven't been read together as one body of evidence. These aren't answers, they're directions. And almost no one has walked down them yet. Trans-Allegheny is still there. You can drive to Weston, West Virginia today, park in the gravel lot. Look up at the 4 stories of hand-cut stone, walk inside, touch the walls. They're cold. They were cold when the first patient arrived in 1864, and they're cold now. The town around it is still small, just under 4,000 people. The building is still bigger than it should be. Bigger than the town that built it. Bigger than the patient population that was supposed to need it. Bigger than the explanation we've been given. 2,400 people once lived inside those walls. In a building meant for 250, in a town of 800, somebody built it, somebody filled it, somebody walked away from it, and the math, no matter how you turn it, still doesn't work.